In the late 1970s, a woman named Michelle Smith began to tell a story of satanic ritual and the occult to her psychiatrist, Dr. Lawrence Pastor of Victoria, British Columbia. Over a period of 14 months, Pastor recorded 600 hours of Michelle's story, which was often recounted in the voice of a 5-year-old child while Michelle was in a deep trance. She spoke of her entry into the satanic cult, which centered around the murder of a woman at an orgy and ended with an attempt on Michelle's life, which she survived. In 1980, Paul Gresco, a staff writer for Maclean's magazine, summarized her story, stating, "The story heats up with the Satanists deciding to steep the girl in evil for an encounter with the devil when he appears for his Feast of the Beast in 1955. Her mother gives her away to another woman who makes her defecate on the Bible and entombs her in a grave before Michelle is imprisoned in a spider-ridden effigy of the devil, has horns and a tail sewn onto her, and witnesses kittens being killed and corpses cut up. Through it all, this 5-year-old instinctively knows that the Bible and the crucifix are her weapons. A fiery Satan arrives for his black mass, where a man is slaughtered and Michelle sees hell, saying, 'There's people with no eyes, and they're bleeding from their eyes. There's people that's got no noses.' But just in time, she is visited by the Virgin Mary and her son, who reassured Michelle that she's strong enough to survive. And in typically terrible doggerel, the devil tells his followers, 'It's your mistake. You'll have to pay. I give her back. You can't give her away.'" Smith's story and all of its gory details reflected the imagery of contemporary Hollywood supernatural horror films like The Exorcist and Rosemary's Baby, which in turn capitalized on religious idolatry to build dread in the viewer. Her experiences were published, as non-fiction and to great acclaim, as Michelle's Story in 1980, earning more than $100,000 on its initial release and more than $250,000 for the subsequent paperback. In addition to its financial successes, the publication is also viewed as an enormous cultural success, kickstarting what is now considered to have been a moral panic that would have significant impact on the West Memphis Three more than a decade later. Hello everyone, this is Professor Popham for CC311, Crime, Media, and the Law. In today's short video, I'm going to discuss the significance of moral panic, and particularly the role of claims makers in propagating cultural fears over Satanism through the 1980s and 1990s. While claims makers were discussed at length in Chapter 2 of Surrett, I'm going to revisit them during our discussion of the moral panic theory during our lecture this week. For now, I want you to focus on the intrinsic connection between claims makers, often framed as knowledgeable experts by the media, and the media construct of predatory criminality. In the case of satanic ritual, this led to a number of self-defined experts on cultist practice who would significantly alter the course of justice through the 1990s. The 1980s also marked the beginnings of a moralistic turn in U.S. society, which included 1. A renewed fundamentalist Christianity movement, leading to a politically active group calling itself the Moral Majority. 2. An anti-cult movement, due in part to the images of mass suicides at the People's Temple, Heaven's Gate, and the Branch Davidians. 3. The establishment of the Church of Satan. 4. Growth in the field of social work, and its emphasis on criminalizing child sexual abuse. And 5. Greater clinical attention paid to post-traumatic stress disorder, most notably including forensic studies of repressed memories. This was the case for Michelle Smith. The collision of these factors led to the problematization of Satanism, and given its presumptive underpinnings of evil, it rocketed through the moral panic process. One key outcome was the rise of a whole host of cultural experts, and I say expert with the most sarcasm possible there, individuals who drew upon their backgrounds to frame themselves as experts in an unprecedented field. An important example here comes from California. In 1983, Peggy McMartin Bucky, director of the McMartin Preschool in Manhattan Beach, California, and her son Raymond were accused of hundreds of instances of child sexual abuse, including rape, oral and anal intercourse, taking pornographic pictures, satanic rituals, abuse of animals, and threatening the children. From 1983 to 1990, they were tried in the longest and costliest trial in American history. Peggy Bucky was acquitted on all counts. Ray Bucky was acquitted on most charges. The jury deadlocked on others, and ultimately a hung jury was declared. Bucky was never tried again. This case highlights the impact of false empiricism on the course of justice, which, when reported via the news media to the public, had greater ramifications. In the case of the Buckys, the allegations followed them for the rest of their lives, and a wave of daycare sex abuse hysteria spread across the English-speaking world. A secondary outcome of the problematization of Satanism was the rise of its use as an accusatory and explanatory label. The term itself came to encapsulate pure evil, so its use in any criminal case tends to preemptively ascribe guilt to the defendants before their case can even begin. This was the case for the West Memphis Three, who your assigned reading Devil's Knot by Mara Leverett is about. 3 teenagers, Damien Eccles, Jamie Baldwin, and Jesse Miskelly, were accused of the gruesome murder of Steve Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers, 3 8-year-olds. The teens were people who you might consider outcasts, particularly in the context of West Memphis, which is located squarely in the U.S. Bible Belt. 2 of them, Eccles and Baldwin, were good friends who were often seen in the community wearing dark clothing and listening to heavy metal acts like Metallica, Guns N' Roses, Ozzy Osbourne, and of course that bastion of satanic rock, U2. Miskelly was a different sort of outcast, having spent much of his life getting into fights and other mischief. These characteristics were enough to mark the boys as different, fulfilling Surratt's statement that predatory criminals are basically different from the rest of us, and that criminality stems from individual deficiencies. Early on in the investigation, the authorities began to hone in on Damien Eccles as a primary suspect. He had spent some time in a youth jail and a psychiatric hospital, and had caught the attention of Jerry Driver, the county's chief juvenile officer. Having interacted with Eccles in the past, Driver believed that he was practicing witchcraft, and passed this information on to the police. Baldwin and Miskelly were roped in on similar assumptions due only to the fact that the boys all knew one another. As Driver saw it, Damien was part of an alarming trend in the country, one that was drawing not just Damien Eccles, but many teenagers towards Satan. As Everett outlines through much of the first half of Devil's Knot, these words, spoken by an individual with little interaction and no expertise, would drive the eventual trial of each of the accused. Ministerial experts would lead free lectures on the indicators of satanic involvement. Newspapers would selectively quote excerpts from Eccles' journal. And a cult expert spoke at the trials, claiming that his 26 years of policing experience, paired with a mail-order PhD, empowered him to speak with authority on Satanism. Each of these had the cumulative effect of casting Damien Eccles, Jamie Baldwin, and Jesse Miskelly as predatory criminals who were divorced from reality, ultimately leaving them in indefensible positions.